Hello there, you're watching World Highlights here on TVR World, where on a weekly basis we bring you a recap of news that made headlines in the past week. I'm Rahmat Idris in Jakarta, Indonesia. This week we are shining a light on the latest from Middle East and Europe, as well as momentous events around the globe. This is World Highlights. In our first segment, pro-Palestine protesters rallied in Amsterdam, accusing Israel of breaching the ceasefire. Gaza's Nasser Hospital received more patients via Rafah as the UAE delivered new aid ahead of Ramadan, and UNRWA staff protested job cuts. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he would discuss key issues with U.S. President Donald Trump, while an Arab League official called resolving the Palestinian issue the region's top priority. And here's the full report.
Footage shows demonstrators chanting while marching with Palestinian flags and placards, among others, reading, "We stand with our Palestinian prisoners, kidnapped, tortured and held captives. Free them all." The demonstrators have also called on governments to become more involved and put pressure on Israel to comply with the ceasefire.
It is said there is a peace plan and a peace board or a board of peace, and it's all nonsense. It's actually...
Footage shows buses arriving with the returnees, who were met by relatives waiting outside the hospital for emotional reunions. On Sunday, the Rafah border crossing in the southern Gaza Strip had been opened to allow patients to leave and to enable Palestinians stranded in the Egyptian side to return, the Palestinian news agency Wafa said. It added that since the crossing reopened last Monday, 189 patients and accompanying relatives had departed Gaza, while 88 stranded citizens had returned. Israeli media reported that only people with prior Israeli approval are being allowed to return to Gaza. They said that after crossing, returnees are taken by bus to an Israeli checkpoint, where they undergo extensive identity checks and physical searching. U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff announced in January the launch of the second phase of the Trump plan, consisting of 20 points to end the conflict in Gaza. The plan including moving from a ceasefire to disarmament, forming a technocratic administration, starting reconstruction, and reopening the Rafah crossing. Head of the Arab League's office in Russia, Walid Hamel-Shiltak, said that solving the Palestine question is the most important task in the Middle East. Speaking in Moscow on Monday, according to Walid Ahmed-Shiltak, Tel Aviv seeks to achieve leadership in the region, disregarding the position of its neighbors. He also expressed hope that participants in U.S. President Donald Trump Board of Peace would adhere to the key points of the plan. The Board of Peace is an international body, the charter of which was signed by Donald Trump on January 22, 2026. Earlier, President Vladimir Putin announced his readiness to transfer $1 billion from Russian assets frozen in the U.S. to the body. Russian presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov was since noted that Washington has yet to respond to the initiative at the publication.
We Gaza, we Iran, we Iran Israel
Speaking ahead of his departure for Washington, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he planned to discuss a number of issues during upcoming tasks with U.S. President Donald Trump. The latest round of talks between Tehran and Washington concluded last Friday with the Sultanate of Oman without resolution, though Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi described the discussion as positive. U.S. President Donald Trump has set two conditions for Iran to avoid American strikes, stating no nuclear capabilities, no protesters' killings. Trump also warned that U.S. warships are currently sailing towards Iran, and it would be better if we do not have to use them. Netanyahu's trip comes against a backdrop of heightened tensions, including U.S. military deployments in the Middle East and warnings of possible military action. Footage released by the Emirates news agency WAM shows humanitarian aid supplies being unloaded from the ship, with volunteers loading boxes onto trucks that later crossed the Rafah land crossing into Gaza. A volunteer said the aid provided by Sakar bin Muhammad Al Qasmi Foundation for the Charity and Humanitarian Work is intended to reach Gaza residents before Ramadan. WAM reported the first batch of assistance entered Gaza 4 days after the humanitarian vessel docked at Egypt's Al Arish port. The humanitarian vessel departed Ras Al Khaimah port on January 22nd, bound for Egypt's Al Arish port before proceeding to Gaza. It is the 12th aid ship sent by the UAE to support Gaza's population. Hundreds of Gazas and employees of the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine Refugees or UNRWA took the streets on Tuesday to protest arbitrary staff reductions at the agency. Footage shows protesters gathering outside an UNRWA school. Under the slogan UNRWA is a red line, demonstrators can be seen holding placards in support of the agency and warning of the impact of continued cuts. In mid-January, UNRWA Commissioner General Philip Lazzarini announced a reduction in weekly working hours in service delivery until further notice, citing unprecedented financial crisis. The measure came into effect on February 1st, according to the Palestinian Information Center. Last week, UNRWA's acting director of affairs in Gaza, Sam Rose, said the survival of Gaza is closely linked to the agency's continued work, describing its operation as a defense humanity and international law.
On our next segment, U.S. President Donald Trump reaffirmed that any Iran deal must prevent Tehran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Iranian officials described recent talks with the U.S. as a fair and mutually acceptable opportunity, while urging Washington to act independently of Israeli influence ahead of Netanyahu's Washington visit. Oman hosted Iran's top security official, and the UN said there is renewed hope for resumed U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations despite the Trump-Netanyahu meeting. Here is the full report.
Likewise, had very good talks on
no nuclear weapons. Trump's right and upfront demands for Iran's as Washington-Tehran talks set to continue. U.S. President Donald Trump made it clear that a deal with Iran would mean no nuclear weapons for Tehran, speaking abroad Air Force One on Friday. Talks between the U.S. and Iran ended in Oman's capital, Muscat, on Friday amid U.S. military activity in the region and concerns about possible military action. Trump also said he had set two conditions for Tehran to avoid U.S. strikes: not acquiring nuclear weapons and not suppressing protests. President of Iran Masoud Pezeshkian addressed the recent Iran-US nuclear negotiation during a meeting with foreign ambassadors in Tehran on Monday, describing the talks as a very good opportunity for a fair, logical, equitable, and mutually acceptable resolution of the nuclear issue. He added that Iran seeks to secure its rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, including uranium enrichment, which also calling for the removal of unjust sanctions. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stressed that diplomacy remains the only way to resolve the nuclear issue, noting that deep mistrust persists due to what he described as past as U.S. auctions. The statements come amid heightened regional tensions and days after indirect nuclear negotiations between Iran and the United States began in Oman. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai called on the United States to act independently of Israeli influence ahead of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's scheduled visit to Washington. Netanyahu, who departed for the U.S. earlier Tuesday, reiterated that Iran would be a central topic of his discussions with Trump. His office stated last Saturday that any negotiations must include limitations on ballistic missiles and a halting of the support for the Iranian axis. Baghai ruled out any alterations to the existing framework of nuclear negotiations. He confirmed the talks would continue in the same form they have been conducted at this stage, with due consideration for an appropriate understanding about the timing and location of the upcoming rounds. Oman's Sultan Haytham bin Tariq received the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Ali Larijani, at the Baraka Palace in Muscat. Footage shows the Omani Sultan and the Iranian officials shaking hands at the meeting attended by several other Iranian officials. The discussions focus on recent updates in the Iran-US negotiations to explore ways of reaching a balanced and fair agreement between the two sides, according to state media reports. Larijani, who had arrived earlier that day, leading a delegation, met upon landing with General Sultan bin Mohammed Al Numani, Oman's Minister of the Royal Office. This visit comes just days after the indirect Iran-US talks that took place in Oman.
On Iran and the U.S.,
UN Secretary General spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said during a press briefing in New York City on Tuesday that there was renewed hope the United States and Iran could resume talks on Tehran's nuclear program, dismissing suggestions that an upcoming Trump-Netanyahu meeting might disrupt the process. Talks aimed at limiting Iran's nuclear activities resumed in Oman last week following months of inactivity. Iranian officials said the discussions came as the U.S. expanded its military presence in the region, including a recent carrier deployment, while President Trump described the high-stakes talks as a good start. Tehran, however, insisted the negotiations should remain focused on nuclear issues and accused the Israeli government of trying to sabotage the diplomatic process. Tensions between Washington and Tehran escalated last year following U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities during the 12-day war with Israel.
Yesterday, and I can tell you that we stand firmly against the use of the death penalty anywhere.
On our third segment, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned Russia would respond militarily if Greenland militarizes against Moscow. UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer faced calls to resign amid the Epstein row, while EU migration and trade policies drew criticism from French and European lawmakers. Meanwhile, Canada opened a consulate in Nuuk as Denmark and Greenland resumed talks with the U.S. over Arctic ambitions. Here is the full report.
Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned that if Greenland were to militarize against Russia, Moscow would take adequate countermeasures, including military technical ones, as he spoke during government hour of the State Duma in Moscow. At the same time, the minister emphasized that the Arctic must remain a zone of peace and cooperation. Lavrov also addressed the situation surrounding the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START, with the US, which expired last week. The New START treaty entered into force in 2011 and was extended until 2026. In 2023, Vladimir Putin announced the suspension of Russia's participation in the treaty, claiming the US was continuing to develop nuclear weapons.
The victims of Epstein have lived.
UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer came under intense pressure to quit this week after losing both his Chief of Staff and Director of Communications over the ongoing Epstein row, and with his party leader in Scotland, Anna Sarwar, called for him to resign. Starmer is seen criticizing US President Donald Trump in the row over the Chagos Island after the president called the decision to hand Diego Garcia home to a US base an act of great stupidity. The US and UK leaders are also seen on Trump's visit in September as they clash over free speech in the UK.
Mr. Speaker,
Starmer was asked to defend people being arrested for social media posts. The US administration has repeatedly criticized the UK and Europe for censorship and an attack on free speech. The UK Prime Minister is also seen with Emmanuel Macron and Volodymyr Zelensky, as the UK and France became just two of the dozens of countries in the so-called coalition of the willing to commit to troops in Ukraine post-ceasefire.
And just to be clear, to vote...
I think we need concrete proposals.
President of the French National Rally, Jordan Bardella, went on to criticize Spain's decision to regularize 500,000 undocumented migrants, calling it a scandal and warning of consequences for the entire Schengen area. Jordan Bardella echoed his concerns, framing the situation within the broader debate on Schengen. He argued that the decision of a sovereign state to grant residence permits to non-EU nationals should not automatically confer freedom of movement across all EU countries. The controversy comes as the European Union faces mounting pressures on multiple fronts. In early 2026, electricity prices in the EU averaged €0.31 per kilowatt-hour. At the same time, Spain's plan to regularize roughly 200,000 undocumented migrants has sparked debate across the Schengen area. Combined with criticism of the Mercosur trade deal, these issues highlight the growing tension in the EU.
The issue of having loans and debts, it's the 90 billion loan package.
Meanwhile, Canada officially opened its consulate in Nuuk on Saturday, with Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand raising the Canadian flag in a ceremony attended by Governor-General Mary Simon and local officials. The consulate opening comes amid heightened international attention on Greenland, following tensions over US President Donald Trump's stated interest in the Arctic territory for national security reasons. Denmark's Foreign Minister Lars Rasmussen highlighted the growing diplomatic presence in Greenland, including Canada's new consulate, as evidence of the territory's increasing geopolitical importance. The ceremony marks a show of solidarity between Canada and Greenland as both Arctic nations navigate shared interests amid rising tensions in the region.
We look eye to eye on so many issues, not only about...
Foreign Minister of Denmark, Lars Rasmussen, along with his Greenland counterpart, Vivian Motzfeldt, confirmed from Nuuk on Sunday the resumption of talks with the United States amid US President Donald Trump's ambitions for the autonomous Arctic territory. Rasmussen echoed the cautious optimism, stressing that the crisis remains in place with no solution found, reporting the situation reached a much better position. Rasmussen also highlighted growing international attention on Greenland, pointing to new diplomatic missions, including Canada's newly opened consulate in Nuuk, as signs of the territory's increasing geopolitical importance. The renewed diplomatic push follows a reported framework understanding reached between Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, aimed at increasing US influence in Arctic security policy.
Until we have the final conclusions, we can't draw any conclusions.
Our last segment from Japan, Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi celebrated a supermajority win in snap elections. From China, President Xi Jinping toured Beijing ahead of Lunar New Year, while Riyadh hosted the World Defense Show with 1,486 exhibitors. Meanwhile, APEC delegates praised China's tech in Guangzhou, and the Board of Peace Summit is set for February 19th in Washington, D.C. We bring you the recap.
Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi arrived at the Liberal Democratic Party headquarters after her ruling coalition won a commanding victory in Sunday's snap lower house election. Securing a supermajority of at least 2/3 of the seats, Takaichi was seen placing red flowers pins next to the names of candidates who won seats in the lower house. Media reports, citing exit polls and early vote counts, said the coalition was on track to secure at least 310 of the 465 seats contested, a sharp increase from the roughly 233 seats it held before the campaign. The result would significantly strengthen Takaichi's legislative position. Chinese President Xi Jinping conducted a 2-day inspection tour in Beijing on Tuesday, extending greetings to the city's residents ahead of the Lunar New Year. During his visit, Xi expressed wishes for peace and prosperity in the upcoming year of the horse. The Chinese New Year, also known as the Lunar New Year, is the most significant traditional celebration for the Chinese, occurring this year on February 17th. The third edition of the World Defense Show opened in Riyadh on Sunday, bringing together more than 1,486 exhibitors from 89 countries. The event highlights the latest developments in defense and security technologies across 5 key domains: air, land, sea, space, and security. It brings together global industry players to enhance cooperation, innovation, and international partnership, contributing to the development of the global defense and security sector. Held under the theme, The Future of Defense Integration, the exhibition runs until February 12th. In South China's Guangzhou City, delegates attending the APEC Senior Officials Meeting and related sessions were impressed by the country's tech innovations. President Prabowo Subianto has been invited to attend the Board of Peace Summit to be held at the Institute of Peace, Washington, D.C., United States on February 19th. An official with the White House said that it has not received any confirmation from the head states to attend the summit next week. The White House has not made an official announcement on the summit of BOP in Washington, D.C. next week.
And that concludes this week's episode of World Highlights. I'm Rahmat Idris in Jakarta, Indonesia. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.